I walked in on my husband under the Christmas tree, but the woman tangled up with him wasn't me. Before we go any further, go on. Grab a cuppa or whatever keeps you steady, because I'm going to take you right into that living room with me. And if you like these messy, real-life Christmas disasters that somehow turn into something else, well, you know where the subscribe button lives. The first thing I noticed wasn't them. It was the smell. Pine needles. That sharp, cold green scent from the real tree I'd insisted on, mixed with the cloying vanilla candle I'd lit before I left for the airport. Home. That was what it was meant to smell like. 28 years of marriage, warm and safe and boring in all the ways I used to tell myself were good. Then I heard it. A little breathy laugh, not mine. I was still standing in the hallway with my suitcase, my coat half off one shoulder. Heathrow wristband from the flight rustling at my wrist. I remember thinking, stupidly, that the lights looked different. We'd gone a bit overboard this year. Fairy lights around the door, the banister, even a string of them over the big window looking out onto the street. Everything was twinkling, sparkling, showing me everything. I stepped into the lounge. Richard was on the rug in front of the tree. His shirt was open, his tie somewhere in the tangle of wrapping paper and gift bags. And Holly, my husband's secretary, from the office Christmas parties and the odd drink with the team, was half under him, her dress rucked up, one leg hooked around his waist. There are moments that split your life into before and after. That was mine. I didn't scream. I thought I might. In all those hypothetical conversations women have in their heads, if he ever cheated, I'd do this, I'd do that. But I didn't. I stood there, fingers still gripping the handle of my suitcase, and heard myself say, in this eerily calm tone, "Oh, well, that explains a lot." Holly went scarlet and scrambled, dress down, hair in her face. Richard twisted round, saw me. And this expression crossed his face: guilt, irritation, calculation, like he was flicking through options on a screen. "Margaret," he said, and his voice cracked. "You weren't due back until tomorrow." "Obviously," I replied. "I won't bore you with verbatim dialogue. You can imagine most of it. The excuses, the 'it just happened,' the 'we've been under pressure.' As if 6 months of sneaking about is some sort of spontaneous accident." Holly started crying, mascara streaking, saying she never meant to hurt me. I remember looking at the Christmas tree behind them, all silver and blue, and thinking, I chose those baubles. I ironed that shirt. He admitted it quickly enough when I pushed 6 months. Since June, while I was working late at the library, covering staff sickness, planning our anniversary trip, texting him photos from my sister's place in Phoenix like a dutiful wife on a little break. I'd been out there 5 days, helping my sister pack up after her own divorce. She cried into cheap rosé about her husband's affair, and we'd laughed, bitterly, at how cliché it all was. You know, those moments where life is waving a great big red flag at you and you just pat it down and carry on. "Get out," I told him. He stared at me, genuinely offended. "It's my house, too, Margaret. Tonight," I said, and I felt my jaw lock. "You will get dressed. You will take your keys. And you will get out. I don't care where you go, but you will not sleep under my roof after doing that on my rug." Holly started to speak. I held up a hand, short little line from me, and she shut up. He left. Eventually, there was bluster. Of course. Some attempt at turning it round on me. If I'd been more attentive. If I hadn't been so tired. If I hadn't gone swanning off to America right before Christmas. You know the script. Be honest with me. Have you ever noticed how cheaters are always the victims in their own stories? The front door slammed, and the house fell silent. I stood in the middle of the lounge, staring at the tree. One of the glass baubles had cracked under somebody's foot. There were tiny shards on the rug, catching the fairy lights. The whole room felt desecrated. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's the only word that fits. 28 years of birthdays and Sunday roasts and quiet Tuesday nights. And suddenly I couldn't bear to be in the same air as that tree. I walked over, reached down, and unplugged the lights. The room went dark in an instant. Fairy godmother's spell broken. I picked up my coat from the banister, grabbed my handbag, left the suitcase where it was, still half zipped, and opened the front door. The cold hit me like a slap. December in the UK is a damp sort of cold that crawls into your bones, the kind that smells of wet tarmac and distant smoke. I stepped out onto the path and pulled the door shut behind me. I didn't lock it. I just left. No plan. No overnight bag. No charger. I had my handbag with my purse and phone, my coat, and the clothes I'd flown in. That was it. I started walking. Our road is one of those middle-class cul-de-sacs estate agents get overexcited about. Bay windows, wreaths on doors. That smug little row of SUVs. Every house was lit up. Families moving behind curtains like shadow puppets. Laughter from one, a telly blaring some festive special from another. I could smell someone's roast potatoes. And there was me, 54 years old, a librarian, the sensible one, the reliable one, walking past with my coat flapping open and my heart somewhere down near my shoes. I didn't cry straight away. My body went into that strange autopilot mode, left, right, across the main road, towards town. Feet knew what to do, while my brain replayed the image of his hands on her waist under my fairy lights. If this is sounding uncomfortably close to home, by the way, you can say so in the comments. You'd be surprised how many of us have stood on that metaphorical pavement, watching the life we thought we had flicker out. Town was quieter than I expected for the weekend before Christmas. Most of the shops were shut, just a few stragglers with shopping bags, hunched against the wind. The lights strung across the high street swayed slightly, throwing colored patches onto the wet paving. That's when I saw her. Outside St. Mary's, on the corner, there's a little stone bench. Normally it's occupied by teenagers with vape clouds or old men with betting slips. But that night an elderly woman was sitting there. No coat, just a thin silver cardigan over a dark dress. Her bare ankles blue-white with cold above sensible shoes. She was staring up at the church tower like she'd forgotten what it was. I stopped. Some part of me, even in free fall, cannot walk past someone who looks that lost. Occupational hazard of spending your life in libraries. You get used to people who don't know what they're looking for. "Are you all right?" I asked. She turned her head slowly, and I saw she was older than I'd thought at first. Late 70s, maybe, though you never can tell. Her hair was beautifully done, a soft white helmet, and there were pearls at her throat, but her eyes were frightened. I was meant to meet someone," she said. Her accent had that old money roundness you hardly hear anymore, but I can't quite remember where or when. Up close, I could see she was shivering, hands trembling in her lap. Her lipstick was perfectly applied. Someone, somewhere, had taken care coaxing her into that outfit. "Let's get you somewhere warm," I said. "We'll sort the rest out once you've thawed out a bit." Murphy's Diner is only 2 minutes walk along from the church. It's one of those places that never quite fits American-style booths. Greasy menu, half the town's teenagers in there at any given time. Tonight, it was mostly delivery drivers and a bored girl behind the counter scrolling on her phone. I guided the woman. She let me take her elbow through the door. The blast of fried onions and coffee hit us. She wrinkled her nose. "I'm not sure I like this place," she murmured. Think of it as a temporary sanctuary. I said, 2 coffees, please. I added to the girl at the counter, and whatever hot food you've got that isn't welded to the grill. We slid into a booth, up close. With the harsh strip lighting, I could see the faintest sheen of sweat on her forehead. Not just cold, then fright, confusion. "What's your name?" I asked gently. She drew herself up slightly, as if remembering. "Eleanor Hawthorne," she said. "My friends call me Ella, or they used to." Eleanor. It sat in the air between us, strange and elegant. "I'm Margaret," I said. "Now, Eleanor, do you have a bag?" "A phone." She patted her lap, frowning, then shook her head. "David had my bag. He went in to pay for petrol. And she looked around, as if expecting the petrol station to materialize in the diner. I must have wandered off. Stupid woman. "Do you know David's number?" She frowned again, digging into some inner pocket of memory. For a moment I thought I'd pushed too hard. That awful, blank panic you sometimes see on older faces. And then she brightened. Yes, I do. I made myself remember his number. Because if I remember him, then I'm not completely gone. Am I? She recited it slowly, carefully. I typed it into my phone, pressed call, and held my breath. He picked up on the first ring. "Hello, Mum. Where are you?" "Hello?" I said, and my voice came out calmer than I felt. "My name's Margaret. I think I'm with your mother. We're in Murphy's Diner near St. Mary's." There was a sort of crash at his end, chair scraping. "Maybe." And then a rush of words. "He'd pulled into a garage on the bypass," he said, "just to pay 2 minutes. And when he came out, she was gone. He'd been driving round town for nearly an hour, checking the church, the park, the shops, calling her mobile, which, it turned out, was in the handbag on his front seat. He sounded older than me, but not by much. Tight-voiced, controlled, with that edge of sheer terror only people caring for someone vulnerable really know. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said. "Please, please keep her there." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and for the first time since I'd left my own house, that felt true. While we waited for him, I bought her coffee and a plate of chips she prodded at more than 8. She asked, in that blunt way certain older women have, why I was out on my own so late at night, looking like I'd been dragged through an airport backwards. So I told her, the Christmas tree, the secretary, 28 years. She listened, eyes sharp now, cutting through the fog. "Idiot man," she said crisply when I'd finished. "Throwing away a librarian. Men are fools. They forget who keeps the catalog of their lives." I laughed, properly laughed. For the first time that day, it came out a bit cracked, but it was there. "Tell me," she went on, as if we were old friends, "do you want to go back to that house?" I thought of the tree, standing there in the dark, the cracked bauble glittering on the rug where they'd rolled. My chest tightened. "No," I said, "I really don't." She nodded, as if I'd confirmed something she already suspected. "That's all right then," she said. "You can come home with me. Now, if a random old lady in pearls in a diner invited you home on the worst night of your life, what would you do, laugh? Decline, politely ring social services?" Before I could decide, the bell over the door clanged, and a man walked in like he'd been shot out of a gun. Mid-50s, good coat, eyes scanning the room with a kind of controlled desperation. When he saw our booth, he exhaled so hard his shoulders dropped. "Mum," he said, crossing the floor in 3 strides. Eleanor's face lit. "David," she said, "there you are. I found a librarian." He hugged her, murmuring something into her hair, and I looked away because it felt too intimate to watch. Then he turned to me. "Thank you," he said. "You've no idea." He stopped. really looking at me for the first time. There was a flicker in his expression, something like recognition, and something like, I don't know, assessment. "I'm David." "Margaret," I said. We shook hands. His was warm, firm, slightly shaking. Mum, being Mum. Apparently, decided introductions were taking too long. Margaret's husband was found rutting under the Christmas tree. She announced, "So I've invited her to stay at Hawthorne House. We've plenty of room." There was a tiny beat of silence where even the friar seemed to pause. David closed his eyes very briefly, like he was counting to 3. "Hawthorne House is our home," he said to me, apologetic. "Mum can be a bit enthusiastic. I'm sure you've got your own people to get back to." "I don't," I said, and it was the truest sentence I'd spoken all day. He studied me for a long moment. The diner hummed around us. Heaters blasting. Someone's phone playing a tinny carol. Outside, I could see the church tower, black against the clouded sky. "Just for one night," he said at last. More to himself than to me. "Mom's right. We've got space. And you shouldn't be on your own after." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely, presumably at the mental image of my living room. Eleanor patted my hand. 12 bedrooms, she said conspiratorially. "You can have the blue one." That's how, on the night my marriage died under a Christmas tree, I found myself climbing into the back of a stranger's black Mercedes, following the sweep of its headlights up a long, curved drive towards a house I'd never seen, a house that was about to rewrite everything I thought I knew about my past and my future. Come with me through those gates in part 2, will you? It gets stranger from here. The gates of Hawthorne House swung open like something out of a period drama, and I had this very clear thought: times I do not belong here, asterisk. You know that feeling when your life has just exploded in a semi-detached somewhere, and suddenly you're gliding up a private drive like an extra in a BBC Christmas special. That was me. If part 1 felt like the wreckage, this was the bit where the universe picked up a random chess piece, me, and dropped it on entirely the wrong board. Gravel hissed under the tires as David's car wound between dark lawns and clipped hedges. The house revealed itself in stages. First, the shadow of a roofline, then chimneys, then the sweep of pale stone caught by the headlights. 3 stories, tall sash windows. Ivy long since tamed into obedience. Not flashy new money. This old, quiet, confident money. David slowed near the steps. The front door opened before we'd even stopped, light spilling out in a neat rectangle. And a woman in her 60s appeared. Apron, gray hair, in a bun, that efficient air you only get from people who've run big houses and big families. "Evening, Mrs. Morrison," David called, as he came round to help his mother out of the car. "Evening, sir." She gave him the sort of look that said, "Times you nearly gave me a heart attack." Again, asterisk. Then she turned her attention to me. "You must be Mrs. Thompson. Come in out the cold. Love." I mumbled something about just being Margaret and tried not to trip on the stone steps. Inside, the hall smelt of beeswax and something savory drifting from a far-off kitchen. Black and white tiles, a sweeping staircase, paintings of disapproving ancestors glaring down at the newcomer in scuffed boots and a creased blouse. Eleanor shook off her son's arm as soon as we crossed the threshold. "Stop fussing, David. I'm not a parcel," she said, and marched well, wobbled with determination, into the hall. Then she turned to me. "The blue guest room." "Yes, 2nd floor, front. Mrs. Morrison will show you. David, go and pour something warming. Margaret has had a day." Understatement of the century. Mrs. Morrison took my coat and handbag with a practiced sweep. like strays wandered in all the time. We'll get you settled first, she said. Then you can decide if you fancy a bit of something hot. Up the stairs, along a landing lined with bookcases, already a good sign, and into what I can only describe as a magazine picture of a bedroom. High ceiling, big windows with heavy curtains, a bed you could do synchronized swimming in. And yes, the walls were a soft, calm blue. The blue room, I said, stupidly. Mrs. Morrison smiled. Her favorite for guests, she said. Bathrooms through there. If you've any washing, just leave it in the basket. I'll bring you up a nightgown if you like. Save you rummaging. I'd left my suitcase back in my own hallway. It hit me then, suddenly, that my knickers and pajamas were still lying a few feet from where my husband had been enthusiastically desecrating our Christmas with his secretary. A nightgown would be wonderful. Thank you, I said, because sometimes there is nothing else to do but accept kindness and keep breathing. When she'd gone, closing the door with a quiet click, I stood in the middle of the room and finally looked at my phone. 5 missed calls from Richard, 3 voicemails, a string of messages, asterisk, we need to talk like adults, asterisk, asterisk, where are you? This is ridiculous. Asterisk, asterisk, Margaret, I'm worried. At least tell me you're safe. I stared at the words until they blurred. 28 years of smoothing his moods, picking up after his mother, cooking his favorites when he'd had a long week. And this man had been on my rug with Holly while my plane was still taxiing. I pressed and held on the message thread. Delete conversation. Gone. Just like that. Tell me honestly, have you ever felt that tiny rush when you ignore the one person who always expected you to answer? It's terrifying and intoxicating at the same time, isn't it? A soft knock at the door interrupted my moment of rebellion. Come in, I called. David stood there, minus coat, tie gone, top button undone, somehow more human without the armor. He held a tray with 3 mugs on it, steam curling up. Mum insists on a welcome drink, he said, and she refuses to be told no. Do you feel up to coming downstairs for half an hour? I hesitated. I was exhausted, hollow, my eyes gritty. But part of me was afraid that if I stayed in this beautiful blue room alone too long, I'd either dissolve or start screaming. Yes, I said, half an hour sounds good. The sitting room was everything you'd expect, fire lit, the good lamps on, paintings and photographs arranged just so. Another Christmas tree stood in the corner, this one tasteful and untainted, all white lights and glass. Above the mantelpiece hung a large oil painting of a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a book in one hand. Harold, Ella Lanner said, following my gaze. She was curled in an armchair, blanket over her knees, one of the mugs already in her hand. My husband, historian, terrible at DIY, very good at knowing what matters. Hot chocolate, David said, handing me a mug, with a splash of something stronger. Mum's recipe. I took a sip. The chocolate was rich and thick, with a whisper of whiskey that burned just enough on the way down. So, Alelenar said briskly, as if we were at a job interview, you are a librarian. Yes, I said, well, on leave, long story. Books. She said, satisfied. Order. Stories. Harold would approve. He collected things, you see. Letters, diaries, photographs. Ordinary people in extraordinary times. American Civil War, mostly. Boxes and boxes of the stuff. It was meant to be his great work. She nodded towards a door at the far end of the room. Studies through there. Disaster area. David keeps shutting the door on it. Mom, David said, with the weary patience of someone who's tried this argument before. What she said, you do. You avoid it. Like you avoid the question of a wife and grandchildren? She turned back to me. Can you believe this? A handsome man in his 50s. Successful. Kind. And he lives with his mother and boxes of dead people's letters. It's not natural. My cheeks warmed. David scrubbed a hand over his face. Mum, he repeated. I'm just stating facts, she said. Then, to me, are you going to stay married to that idiot who rolls around on carpets? Or are you free? I nearly inhaled the hot chocolate. I don't know yet, I said, because despite deleting his messages, the word, times divorce times, still felt like a foreign object in my mouth. Well, she said, consider yourself on probation. We need someone sensible in this house. There was something in her eye as she said it. Humor. Yes. But also a measuring look, like she was slotting me into some mental plan. At the time, I assumed it was just matchmaker mischief. You don't have to decide anything tonight, David said quietly to me, ignoring his mother's theatrics. About him. Or any of this. I know it's a lot. I met his eyes over the rim of my mug. That might be the understatement of the year, I said. His mouth twitched. For a moment, the three of us sat there in the soft lamplight, the exhausted sun, the fading matriarch, and me, the woman whose life had just been blown sideways into their sitting room. If someone had pressed pause, framed it, you'd never guess how many fractures there were beneath the surface. Anyway, Ella Lanar said, clapping her hands once, businesslike, down to brass tacks. You need somewhere to be, Margaret. We need help. Harold's archive is a shambles, and my brain is not what it was. David, she shot him. A look is drowning. So, we hire you. Hire me, I repeated. You organize books for a living. Do you not? She said. You can organize boxes. 2 weeks. You live here. You put Harold's work in order. You keep an eye on me when David is out. We pay you properly. Everybody wins. It's really not that simple, David began. Why not? She demanded. Because she's... What? 2. Asterisk, what times capable, kind, married to an idiot we don't care about. I could feel myself going red again. Look, David said to me, turning in his chair, so he was facing me squarely. I am very grateful for what you did tonight, but I don't want you to feel obligated or trapped or like we're taking advantage when you're vulnerable. What would it involve? I asked. Because underneath the shock and the humiliation, another part of me, the part that had always loved history and never quite forgiven herself for not doing archaeology, was listening very carefully, sorting, cataloging, making sense of 40 years of my father's obsession, he said. Letters, diaries, photographs, some financial records, all over the place. I can show you tomorrow, if you like, and you'd be paid. Eleanor cut in, properly. David will tell you the numbers. I don't do maths after 8 o'clock. He hesitated, then named a weekly figure that made my librarian's salary look like pocket money. That's very generous. I managed. He shrugged. A little awkward. It's specialist work. And urgent. I've been putting it off. There it was again. That tug. The sense that stepping into this house wasn't just escape. It was some sort of doorway. To what? I didn't yet know. If you want to stay a few days, no commitment, and have a look at it, he said, you'd be very welcome. If you decide it's not for you, no harm done. We'll get you back home or to your sisters or wherever you want to go. Home. The word flashed up an image of the dark lounge, the unplugged tree, the cracked bauble. I'll think about it. I said, "Thank you." Later, in the blue room, I changed into the soft cotton nightgown Mrs. Morrison had left on the bed, pale green, old-fashioned, smelling faintly of lavender. I caught sight of myself in the mirror, hair flattened from travel, mascara smudged, lines I hadn't noticed deepening around my mouth. "You look knackered." "Love," I told my reflection. She rolled her eyes back at me. Another knock, softer this time. "It's just me," came Eleanor's voice. "I bring reinforcements." She shuffled in with a tray, another mug of hot chocolate, this one smelling even more of whiskey. "Nightcap," she said, "and woman talk, if you can bear it." We sat on the edge of the enormous bed like conspirators at a sleepover. She told me about Harold, how he'd fallen in love with history at 12, how he'd spent their honeymoon dragging her round American battlefields taking notes. He always said the big men get their monuments. She said, but it's the small people who carry the real stories. The privates, the nurses, the wives waiting at home. He wanted to give them a book of their own. Her fingers toyed with her wedding ring as she spoke. Sometimes her sentences trailed off, and she had to fish for a name or a date. But the bones of the story were there, strong and clear. "Is that why you want the archive finished?" I asked gently. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw the sharp young woman she must once have been. "I don't want Harold to fade before I do," she said. "And I don't want David to be alone when I'm more gone than here. Men like my son, sensible and loyal. They don't always choose well." She told me about Catherine Next Beautiful, charming, devoted. On the surface, how David had found out, a few years back, that she'd been treating his proposal like a career move while sleeping with his business partner and at least one other man. PI reports, hotel receipts, that quiet shattering of trust. "Broke him," she said simply. "He won't admit it, but it did." He started looking at everyone like they might be Catherine underneath, including himself. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our spiked chocolate. "Don't pretend everything's fine when it isn't, Margaret," she said suddenly. "I did that with Harold's heart. With his tiredness, I told myself he was just getting older, until he wasn't here at all. You have one life. Don't waste it keeping other people comfortable. If that hits a bit too close, you're not alone." You can tell me in the comments if you've ever stayed too long in a story that was already over. When she'd gone, I turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of the house. Somewhere below, a clock chimed. My phone buzzed once on the bedside table. Another call I let slide into nothing. In the morning, I woke to pale winter light and the smell of coffee. Mrs. Morrison was all brisk cheer at breakfast. David was already half in work mode, laptop open at one end of the table, glasses perched on his nose. Ella Laner buttered toast with intense concentration. "Ready to see the monster?" David asked. When I'd eaten enough to feel marginally human, Harold's study was at the back of the house, overlooking a bare winter garden. The door stuck slightly as he pushed it open, like the room itself was resisting being disturbed. Boxes, piles, stacks, filing cabinets with drawers half open, sheaves of paper poking out. The desk was buried under teetering towers of letters tied with perished ribbon. A faint smell of old paper and dust and, faintly, pipe smoke. Oh, I breathed, and despite everything, my heart lifted. "This is after I tried to make a start," David said wryly. "You should have seen it before." He looked defeated, standing in the doorway, more than the practical mess. I could see the grief in it. Like every unsorted letter was another thing he'd failed to do for his father. "All right," I said, that practical part of my brain snapping into place. "First rule, we don't panic. Second, we don't touch anything until we know how we're going to record it. You've got any kind of list, inventory notes." He blinked at me. then laughed softly. I knew there was a reason Mum likes you. We spent the next hour just walking round the room. Me with a notebook, him pointing out rough groupings, letters from soldiers, letters from families, diaries, financial records. I suggested an initial categorization type: date, region, a simple spreadsheet to start. Then we could refine. Somewhere between the third and fourth box, I had this odd sensation, like a déjà vu, but deeper. Standing next to him at the desk, heads bent over a tangle of papers, I felt familiar, as if my body remembered this posture, this proximity, even if my mind didn't. Strange, David murmured, almost to himself. Feels like we've done this before, doesn't it? A little shiver ran down my spine. Have we? I said lightly. You got a secret past with a middle-aged librarian I should know about. He smiled, but there was a question in his eyes now. Something turning over. You know, that sense that a memory is just beyond your reach. Like a word on the tip of your tongue, that's where we were. The two of us. Standing in Harold's chaos, on the edge of something neither of us could quite name yet. Behind us, the door creaked. Well, came Eleanor's voice. Isn't this just like old times? We turned. She was leaning on her stick in the doorway, watching us with that sharp, assessing gaze. Tell me, Margaret, she said, head tilted. What was your surname before Thompson? Dear. I felt my mouth go dry. Collins. I heard myself say. My maiden name was Collins. If you've ever had your own past reach up and grab you by the throat, you'll understand what happened next. Part 2 was me tiptoeing round the edges of this house. Part 3 is where the floor gives way and I realize I've been here before. Ella Lanner's eyes sharpened, the fog lifting in an instant. Margaret Collins, she said slowly, from Birmingham, English and history at university. Met my son in the library because he was pretending to revise and actually staring at you. My stomach dropped. David went absolutely still beside me. I could feel, without looking, the way his body had tensed. Mum, he said quietly. She ignored him. You came here for Thanksgiving, she went on, her gaze fixed on my face as if she were pulling memories out of it. 1994. You helped me in the kitchen. You and David practically glued at the hip. And then you went home after Christmas, and my idiot husband, she broke off, color rising in her cheeks. Ah, she said. Yes, that's how it was. I felt as if someone had punched the air out of me. The study blurred a little. The boxes and papers. The view of the winter garden. All receded. David Harrison. I whispered. He flinched at the name. You know that feeling when a half-forgotten dream suddenly clicks into place. I could see him now as he'd been then, 21. Hair longer, less gray at his temples. That same serious mouth that smiled rarely but lit his whole face when it did. The boy who'd walked me home from lectures. Who'd kissed me under dripping trees. Who'd told me he could see our whole lives ahead. And then disappeared. Margaret, he said, turning towards me fully now. Can we? He gestured towards the door, away from his mother's keen gaze. Please. I nodded because my legs felt too weak to do anything else. We left the study, walked down the corridor in silence, and ended up in a smaller sitting room I hadn't seen yet, book-lined, with a worn sofa and a view of the side lawn. Somewhere, Mrs. Morrison was clattering in the kitchen. Somewhere, a clock ticked too loudly. He closed the door with exaggerated care, then stood with his hand still on the handle, as if he might bolt at any second. So, I said, because somebody had to start. You're David Harrison Hawthorne. Harrison's my middle name, he said. Mum thought it sounded less grand at uni, less likely to put people off, so I used that. A humorless little smile tugged at his mouth. Seems it didn't entirely work. I sank into the sofa. My knees weren't doing their job. He stayed standing, as if sitting down would be some admission he wasn't ready to make. I waited for you. You know, I said, I hadn't intended to, but there it was, out in the air between us. After Christmas, you said you'd call once you were back from your parents. I checked the post every day. I jumped every time the phone rang. Nothing. His eyes closed briefly. I know, he said. I know exactly what I did. And I've thought about it every single year since. Do you ever wonder how many people are walking around with apologies they never gave, festering inside them? Hearing his felt like touching a bruise. I'd long forgotten the origin of it. He crossed the room then, sat opposite me in an armchair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. My father called me into his study the day after you left. He began, and there was a rhythm to it, like he'd rehearsed this confession 100 times. He'd done his usual digging. He knew where you were from, what your parents did, your scholarship details. He said you were ambitious. That was his polite word. That you'd seen the house, the cars, the lifestyle, and you'd attach yourself like a limpet until I married you. I flinched. I couldn't help it. I told him that was rubbish, David went on, that you didn't even know the full extent of the money. You thought this place was, what did you call it? Ridiculously posh but cozy round the edges, I said automatically, and the fact that the phrase was still sitting out on a shelf in my brain after nearly 30 years did something unpleasant to my chest. A real smile flickered, then vanished. He said if I kept seeing you, he'd cut me off. David said simply, no trust fund, no help with the business, nothing. And I was 21 and stupid and terrified of disappointing him. So instead of being a man and talking to you, explaining, I just didn't call. Cowardice is an ugly thing, especially when someone names it themselves. You chose the money, I said. I kept my voice even. Over me. Yes, he said, and his voice cracked properly on that single syllable. I did. I told myself I'd spare you the humiliation of knowing why. I told myself you'd move on quicker if there was no messy, long goodbye. Really, it was just easier for me. He wasn't making excuses that perversely made it worse and better at the same time. I thought I'd done something wrong. I said quietly, that I'd misread everything, that you'd realized I wasn't clever enough, or pretty enough, or enough. You were everything, he said, and there was a nakedness to it that made me look away. That was the problem. I let him weaponize that against you in my head, and I've regretted it for 29 years. If you're shouting at your screen right now, by the way, tell him to get stuffed. Margaret, I hear you. I really do. But real life isn't that clean, is it? The boy I'd loved was sitting in front of me inside the man who'd almost certainly saved his mother's life last night. And I was no longer 21 and clear-cut either. Silence stretched between us, thick with old hurt and new understanding. Did you ever tell anyone, I asked, about me? He laughed once, short and sharp. Only every woman daft enough to get close, he said. They all got measured against you, without knowing it. Catherine, most of all. I thought of Eleanor's nightcap confessional, the cheated-on fiancé, the PI reports. And you, he asked, looking up. Did you marry a safe man? I said, comfortable, solid. Thought I'd misjudged capital L love. So I went for reliability instead. We built something steady. Or I thought we had. Until the Christmas tree, he said. Until the Christmas tree, I agreed. We sat with that for a while. I didn't know you were rich, I said eventually. Back then, I knew your parents' house was big. I thought you were middle class with a nice family, I would have married you in a bedsit over a chip shop. David, I loved you. I wasn't hunting a trust fund. His eyes shone, and he pressed his thumb hard against his lower lip like he was physically stopping himself saying something. It doesn't matter now, I added quickly, because the room felt like it was tipping. We're not those people anymore. I'm 54 and technically homeless. You're, well, you're you. We have grown children's worth of baggage between us and a mother downstairs who might give us her blessing over breakfast and forget who I am by lunch. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You're right, he said. We're not those people. But I don't want to waste whatever this is by pretending we're strangers. He rubbed his hands together, searching for words. How about this? He said at last. We acknowledge what we were. We accept I behaved appallingly. And then we start again. From here, as we are now, no grand declarations, no pressure. We work together on my father's archive. We look after Mum. And we see. And my marriage, I said. Technically, I'm still in it. His jaw tightened. I'm not going to be the other man. He said, I won't push. You make your decisions about Richard for you, not for me. If this ever becomes anything, it'll be because you're free, not because you're running from something into me. It was, annoyingly, exactly what I needed to hear. You do realize how terrifyingly reasonable that sounds, I said. I'm trying a new thing called not being a coward. He replied, feels strange. Quite like it. Though, if you were me, sitting in that battered armchair in a room that smelt of old books and furniture polish, what would you have done? Stormed out, fallen into his arms. Or, what I actually did, take a very deep breath and say, all right, we see. We didn't seal it with a kiss. This isn't a rom-com. Life isn't that neatly edited. We went back to the study and spent the rest of the day elbow deep in other people's love letters instead, which is its own brand of torture when your own history is humming under your skin. By late afternoon, my brain was mush. We'd established a basic system box numbers, rough dates, categories. David was starting to look less haunted by the chaos. I was starting to see why Harold had become obsessed. There were voices in those pages, ordinary men and women, that grabbed you by the lapels. Back in the blue room that evening, after dinner, I checked my phone. Richard had been quiet all day. That should have warned me. At 9:30, the screen lit up with his name. I stared at it until it stopped, then watched as the one new voicemail notification popped up. A minute later, a text arrived. Asterisk. This is childish. I'm willing to fight for us. We need to talk properly. Fight for us. I actually laughed. The phone rang again. Same name. Same choice. This time, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I answered. Where are you? He demanded, without preamble. Linda says, you're not in Phoenix. Are you at some hotel with who? It's none of your business where I am, I said, keeping my voice low. You lost the right to ask when you unzipped your trousers under my Christmas tree. Richard, he huffed, I told you it was a mistake. We can fix this. 28 years. Margaret, you don't throw that away over. Over 6 months of lying, I cut in. Let's be clear on the timeline. He went quiet for a second. Fine, he said. Yes. I slept with Holly. I was lonely. You were always at that bloody library. We weren't connecting. But I'm willing to put the work in, to fight for us. And Holly, I asked, what about her? Are you still sleeping with her? He hesitated. I could hear the mental cogs turning, weighing up lies versus possible witnesses. It's complicated, he said at last. Things don't just stop overnight. Feelings don't. Thank you, I said, and ended the call. The silence afterwards was enormous. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, phone still in my hand. That was it. I realized, whatever the law might say, whatever paperwork had to be filed, the marriage itself had just died properly in that tiny, deliberate click of my thumb. A soft knock at the door. "Margaret, it's David. Are you all right?" There must be a memo that goes round these big houses saying no one is allowed to cry in peace. "Come in," I said, wiping my eyes with the heel of my hand. He took one look at me and closed the door behind him. "He called," he said, "not a question. He's willing to fight for us," I said, air quoting with a sort of hysterical brightness. "Just not willing to stop sleeping with Holly. Apparently that's complicated." "Idiot," David said softly. "Utter idiot." He sounded so affronted. I went on, as if I've inconvenienced him by having feelings about it. As if I'm property that's wandered off. David's jaw set. "You are not his property," he said. You, he spread his hands, searching for the right word. "You are clever and kind and funny, and you walked out into the cold rather than sit in that house and pretend it was fine. And if he can't see that, he doesn't deserve to keep you." I felt another tear slip, hot and annoying. I deleted his messages last night. I confessed, like a teenager admitting to bunking off. It felt good. "Good," he said. "Delete the whole man, if you like. I'll cheer." That made me snort, which was better than sobbing. He hesitated, then stepped closer. For the avoidance of doubt, he said quietly, "I am very much attracted to you, then and now. But I meant what I said. I won't be the refuge you run to because he's an idiot. I'll be here, regardless. As your employer, your colleague, your friend. The rest is later." It was unfair. How much steadier those words made me. "Thank you," I said, "for not being 21. He smiled, just a little. "Believe me, I'm not." After he'd gone, I lay awake a long time, listening to the wind worrying at the old window frames. Somewhere in the small hours, I noticed a faint glow at the edge of the curtains. I got up, pulled them back. Snow, soft and thin, just beginning to settle on the dark lawns and hedges. The first of the season. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. One new message from Richard. Asterisk. "If you won't come home, I'll come to you. We are going to talk, whether you like it or not." I stared at the words, the snow falling silently beyond the glass, and felt that now familiar drop in my stomach, because whatever peace I'd found inside these old stone walls was about to be tested in a very public, very ugly way. By the time Richard walked into Hawthorne House, the snow outside made the whole scene look almost picturesque, if you didn't know you were watching a man try to bully his way back into your life. You remember that last message from part 3, don't you, Times? "If you won't come home, I'll come to you." Asterisk, well, he kept his word, for once. The morning started deceptively gentle. I woke to a white world lawns, hedges, the gravel drive all dusted like icing sugar. Hawthorne House looked softer under snow, less severe, like an old lion with its mane frosted. From my window, I could see David down below, hands in his coat pockets, talking to one of the gardeners and pointing at the drive, already planning the day's logistics. Over breakfast, Eleanor declared it a snow day in that imperious way of hers. "Roads will be chaos," she said, buttering toast as if issuing military orders. "You are both staying in. And you, David, are not going near that office. We have more important work." David raised an eyebrow. "Have we?" She nodded towards the corridor that led to Harold's study. "Blue ribbon box," she said. "It's time." The blue ribbon box turned out to be exactly that, a battered hat box. tucked away on a top shelf, tied with a faded blue silk ribbon. David brought it into the study like it was something sacred. Mom and Dad always said this was special, he said, resting it carefully on the cleared corner of the desk. I wasn't allowed to go near it as a child. Because you had jam on your fingers, Eleanor sniffed, and no respect for history. She looked at me. Go on. Margaret, librarian's privilege. Inside, under a layer of old tissue paper, were letters. Dozens of them. Cream envelopes gone ivory with age. Each one tied in pairs with delicate blue ribbon. Date and name written in Harold's surprisingly elegant hand. James and Catherine Morrison. I read from the first bundle. 1,862. 1,883. Ah, Eleanor breathed. Yes, them. We sat at Harold's old desk, David on one side, me on the other. Eleanor settled in an armchair like a queen holding court. Outside, the snow fell thicker, softening the light. The letters told a story in fragments. James, a young clerk turned reluctant soldier. Catherine, the woman he left behind. Notes about the price of bread and the fear of cannons. Promises written by candlelight in cramped, hurried script. Long silences. Then, years later, a new flurry of letters, as if someone had shaken the box of fate and given them another go at each other. 23 years. Eleanor said, tapping one of the later envelopes. That's how long it took them. War, illness, other people's expectations. And yet, there they were, writing again as if they'd never stopped. Brave fools. There was a charge in the room that had nothing to do with old paper. David and I avoided looking directly at each other. It felt like standing in front of a mirror that insisted on showing you more than your reflection. Would you do it? I asked Eleanor quietly. Start again with someone after that long. I did, she said simply. Harold and I nearly missed each other twice. Wrong timings. Wrong assumptions. If we hadn't been idiots the second time, you'd be in a different house now. She turned that sharp gaze on me. When life throws you the same person twice, Margaret, you should at least ask why. If you were in my place, would that thrill you or terrify you? Honest answer. You can tell me. We were halfway through a letter where James described the smell of snow on the camp, like everything bad had been covered, but not erased, when Mrs. Morrison appeared in the doorway. Apron on, face pinched in a way I hadn't seen before. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but, Margaret, love, there's a gentleman to see you. Every muscle in my body knew who it was before my brain caught up. Dark coat, bit red in the face. Insists he's your husband. She went on, he's in the front hall. I didn't want to bring him through until I checked. The air changed. Even the letters on the desk seemed to bristle. David's eyes met mine. Do you want to see him? He asked. I think I have to, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. But I don't want to do it alone. I'll be there, he said immediately. Eleanor pushed herself up with her stick. And me, she said. This is my house. I'm not having strange men stomping about unsupervised. The three of us moved down the corridor together, like a very odd little unit, the betrayed wife, the old love, the matriarch with the fading mind and the still razor-sharp tongue. Richard was standing in the hall, just inside the front door, looking around with naked calculation. He'd dressed for performance, good coat, scarf I'd bought him one Christmas, shoes polished within an inch of their lives. His gaze skated over the paintings, the staircase, the chandelier, and I could see the little flicker in his eyes times. Ah, money. Margaret, he said, spotting me, finally. He strode forward as if he might embrace me. I stepped back. This is private property, David said, his voice mild but with steel underneath. You're a guest here. You speak to Margaret with respect. or you leave. Richard looked him up and down, attempting to sum him up in a glance and failing. And you are, he asked. David Hawthorne. David said, I own the property you've just walked into. Something in Richard's shoulders tightened visibly. I've been worried sick, he said, turning back to me with an attempt at wounded husband. You disappear. You don't answer your phone. Linda's got no idea where you are. And then I hear you're holed up in some stranger's mansion. Stranger, Eleanor repeated, stepping forward. Well, I suppose I am to you. Eleanor Hawthorne. This is my house. Or it was before I gave it to my son. Margaret is our guest. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. This wasn't the audience he'd rehearsed for. Richard, I said, keeping my voice even, what exactly is it you want? I want my wife to come home, he said, so we can talk like adults? Not. Run away to play Lady of the Manor. He said it like a joke, but the sneer underneath was loud. We times are times adults, I said, which is why I left when I walked in on you with Holly. Remember her. His jaw clenched. I told you I was willing to fight for us. We've had a good life. Margaret, one mistake doesn't erase 28 years. 6 months, I corrected. 6 months of lying, and according to last night's call, still ongoing. Color rose in his face. He flicked a glance at David, then at the hall, no doubt calculating the cost of the furniture. Is this about money? He asked suddenly. Is that what this is? You get one look at this place and decide you can do better than a solicitor's wife. If you could have heard the silence that fell, then David froze. Eleanor's eyes flashed. Mrs. Morrison, hovering discreetly by the doorway, sucked her teeth. Careful, I said quietly. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Richard pushed on. Reckless now. Run off for a few days. Land yourself somewhere like this. With some rich widower, he flicked his head at David, and suddenly your long-suffering husband looks a bit small. Doesn't he? I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. Oh, Richard, I said, you really do think everything is about you. What would you call it? Then he demanded, you walk out. You don't answer. And I find out you're living with another man. Living times with times I cut in. I have a room here while I help his family. That's all. Whatever fantasies you're spinning to make yourself feel better about your own behavior are your problem, not mine. His hand shot out and gripped my arm, fingers digging into my coat sleeve. Don't talk to me like that, he hissed. You're still my wife. Before I could react, David was between us. Hand on Richard's wrist, voice low but deadly. Take your hand off her, he said. Now. Richard jerked away as if burned. This is between me and my wife, he snapped. No, David said. The moment you laid a hand on her in my hall, it became my business. And while we're being honest, you lost the right to call her my anything when you decided someone else's lipstick looked better on your shirt. Eleanor let out a little satisfied humph noise. You have no idea what our marriage has been like, Richard said, but the bluster was starting to fray. I know enough, David replied. I know you've been sleeping with your secretary for half a year and somehow still feel entitled to indignation. That's plenty. For a second, it looked like Richard might swing for him. Instead, he straightened his coat, smoothed his scarf, tried to reassemble his dignity. Fine, he said. If that's how you want to play it, you walk away now. Margaret, you walk away with nothing. I'll make sure of it. House, savings, pension. You won't see a penny if you set up house with him. The old Margaret, the one who'd spent years balancing budgets and quietly worrying about mortgages, would have quailed at that. This new, raw, freezing cold version of me looked him in the eye and said, I'd rather live in a bedsit over a chip shop on my own terms than in a 4-bed detached with a man who thinks I'm a convenience. Go ahead. Do your worst. If you've ever said the brave thing while your insides are wobbling like jelly, you'll know that particular cocktail of terror and triumph. He stared at me, really stared, as if trying to locate the woman who used to apologize for taking the last biscuit. Unbelievable, he muttered. Absolutely unbelievable. Then, louder. Enjoy your upgrade. He shot David a look dripping with contempt. She's your problem now. He turned on his heel and stalked out, door slamming hard enough to rattle the glass in the fanlight. The silence he left behind hummed. Well, Eleanor said eventually, what a thoroughly unpleasant little man. I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding and sank onto the bottom step of the stairs. My hands were shaking. He's bluffing, David said. About the money, he knows you've got rights. Does he? I said weakly. Because I don't. Not really. I've never done this. You will not be left with nothing, Eleanor said fiercely, lowering herself onto the step beside me. We won't allow it. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But later, when my phone buzzed again, this time with my sister's name, reality sharpened. Have you completely lost it? Linda demanded. As soon as I answered, he's telling everyone you've run off with some millionaire. Says you've been having an affair behind his back for months and you're trying to take him to the cleaners. I sat on the edge of the bed in the blue room, heart pounding. What I managed. He's hired a private investigator, she went on. Told Mum you've been seeing this bloke in some big house since summer, planning your escape. He's trying to get ahead of the narrative. Margaret, paint you as the cheat. The sheer audacity of it made my vision go white for a second. He's the one with the secretary, I said. I'm the one who walked in on them. I know that, she said. You know that. But he's already told half the extended family you're having a midlife crisis and he's the injured party. Get yourself a good solicitor. Fast. After I hung up, I sat very still. The snow outside had thickened to a proper fall, the world going quieter and whiter by the minute. Inside, my life was getting messier. If this sounds like the kind of stunt your ex would pull, by the way, you have my full permission to vent below. Truly. I found David in the study, staring at the letters without seeing them. He's hired a PI, I said. He's telling people I'm the one who ran off, that we've been having an affair for months. He wants to use it in the divorce. David swore under his breath, a word I'd not yet heard from him. Of course he does, he said. Classic projection. Right. We need proper legal advice, not just my vague sense of things from business. I can't afford some top-flight solicitor, I said, panic rising. If he drags this out, I'll be... You're not paying, came Eleanor's voice from behind us. I am. Or rather, Harold is... It's what he'd have done for a friend. We both turned. She was in the doorway, one hand on her stick, the other holding the phone. I've already rung James, she said. Patterson. Best divorce man I know. Well, his father did mine. But never mind. Same firm. He'll be here in the morning. Eleanor, I began. No arguments. She said, David, you can sign whatever checks he puts in front of you. Margaret, you will let clever people with good suits fight this battle, so you can get on with reading dead people's letters and deciding what to do with the rest of your life. I don't want to be rescued, I said, hearing the wobble in my own voice. I've spent 28 years standing behind a man while he took the credit. I can't just swap one for another. David stepped closer, palms open in that careful, non-threatening way. This isn't about rescuing you, he said. This is about partnership. You have skills we don't. You're saving my father's work. Let me use the one thing I have more of than you, money, to level the playing field with Richard. Not to buy you, to back you. The way he said it, eyes steady, no hint of smugness, sank into a place in me I hadn't realized was still hungry for that kind of respect. "What if we end up together?" I blurted. "Won't it look exactly like what he's saying, that I traded up, then we are careful?" He said, "We keep things slow, professional. No hand-holding in front of windows. No scandals for the PI's camera. You make your decisions about your marriage in court as a woman on her own, not as someone's fiancé. If, afterwards, you still want me." His mouth twitched. "We'll let the gossips say what they like." Eleanor snorted. "Gossips always do." She said, "Let them. The truth has a longer shelf life." I looked from one to the other. The man who'd once chosen money over me and was now offering it as armor. And the woman whose mind was slowly slipping but whose instincts were razor sharp. "All right," I said at last. "We fight." I didn't know then that fight would mean 6 weeks of statements and bank records, character references, and quietly humiliating questions about my sex life. I didn't know how much uglier Richard would get when cornered. All I knew was that I'd just declared war. Not just on him, but on the part of myself that had always chosen peace over justice. James Patterson turned up the next morning with snow on his shoulders and the calm of a man who's seen far worse marriages explode than mine. If part 4 was me saying, "Fine then, we fight," part 5 is where you see what that actually looks like. The slow, grinding sort of war that happens in offices, and on paper, while your real life tiptoes forward beside it. He shook my hand in the smaller sitting room, where the fire was already going, and Eleanor had insisted on putting out her best biscuits for psychological advantage. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, voice warm but brisk. "I've had a brief word with Eleanor, and I gather your husband is attempting to recast himself as the injured party." "That's one way of putting it," I said. David sat on the other armchair, deliberately a pace away from me, as if there were a visible line on the rug that neither of us would cross. I noticed it. I suspect James did too. "Right," James said, flipping open a leather folder. "Let's start with the basics. 28-year marriage. Joint home. His income significantly higher than yours. You walked in on him with his secretary 6 months into an affair he admits to." Yes, I said. "And he's now got a private investigator trying to take photographs of you in a house owned by a man you knew at university. Claiming times, your time's the one having an affair." "Yes," I repeated. Saying it all out loud like that made it sound even more ridiculous. He nodded, as if I'd confirmed his working theory that Richard was an idiot. "Good," he said. "Well, not good, obviously, but clear. This is, forgive me, a classic of the genre. The PI is for intimidation. He wants to scare you into a bad settlement. We will not be scared." He looked up then, directly at me. "You are not leaving that marriage with nothing," he said. "The law won't allow it, and nor will I." Something in my chest loosened. "However," he went on, "perception matters. Judges are human. Juries of your peers gossip. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, but I would strongly recommend that until the financial order is sealed, you and Mr. Hawthorne nod towards David, behave as colleagues and friends in public. No hand-holding. No bedroom photographs. No helpful surprise witnesses for your husband's side." "Of course," David said immediately. "Already doing that," I said. "Excessively, some might say." James smiled. "Excellent. In that case, we proceed on offense, not defense. We document his affair. We document your contributions. We make it very clear that your decision to leave was a response to sustained betrayal, not a whim or a midlife fling. He will huff and puff, And then he'll do what most men like him do when faced with the prospect of public scrutiny. What's that? I asked. Fold, he said. If you've ever sat opposite a professional who actually knows what they're doing after months of chaos, you'll know that's strange. Shaky relief. I could have cried. I didn't, not yet. The next 6 weeks blurred into a rhythm mornings in Harold's study with David, afternoons, and the odd grim evening with James in the little sitting room going over statements, bank records, timelines. My life laid out in printed spreadsheets and carefully worded paragraphs. Richard, predictably, tried everything. He claimed I'd been emotionally distant for years, that I'd driven him to Holly by being too focused on my career. He hinted that I'd had inappropriate friendships at the library. The PI produced photographs of me walking from the house to town with David 3 days after I moved in, as if 2 people sharing a pavement at noon constituted adultery. James dismembered each attempt with professional courtesy. Dates, phone records, the fact that Holly's messages went back months, hotel receipts, the undeniable polarity of wife walking with man in daylight versus husband on rug under Christmas tree. More than once, I watched his emails pop up on my phone, forwarded from James. Is greater than asterisk. We advise your client that pursuing this line may open him to scrutiny he would prefer to avoid. I imagined Richard reading that and seeing his safe little affair suddenly held up to the light. All the while, life at Hawthorne House continued in its own gentle orbit. The study slowly transformed from a paper avalanche into something like a proper archive. We bought new acid-free boxes. I created a catalog system on David's laptop. There's a quiet satisfaction in giving chaos a skeleton. Dates, locations, subjects, like laying bones out straight so the story can stand up again. One afternoon, as I was typing up accession numbers, David leaned against the desk, watching me. You really are frighteningly good at this, he said. I should hope so, I said. I've been practicing on late fees and missing books for 30 years. He hesitated. Have you ever thought of doing more with it? With what? History. Research. You light up more over some 19th century widow's shopping list than most people do over a spa weekend. I laughed. I did once. I said, at 20, I wanted to do archaeology. Dig things up. Go on digs in Turkey and Greece and all that. Then life happened. Dad got ill. Money was tight. I took the sensible job. He was quiet for a moment. Do you still want it? He asked. In some form. There it was again. That tap on the shoulder from an old dream. If you're my age, you might know it. That sudden thought of, oh, I could still... That feels both thrilling and ridiculous. I don't know, I admitted. Feels a bit late to be crawling around in trenches with teenagers. Who says it has to be trenches? He said. There are MAs, local universities, part-time, historical research, archives. You could be the terrifying, mature student who actually does the reading. I snorted. Terrifying. Am I? Deeply, he said softly. In the best way. That night, in the blue room, I sat with my laptop and quietly Googled part-time archaeology MAUK like a teenager looking up forbidden music. Warwick, Birmingham, distance learning. One of them had a strand in historical landscapes and material culture. Another focused on community heritage projects. It was like someone had laid a map over my life and drawn a route I'd always ignored. I didn't hit apply yet, but the tabs stayed open. That was a start. Meanwhile, the unofficial PI war continued. Every so often, I'd spot a car loitering on the lane outside, or a shape with a camera near the gates. David had a security firm come and have a word. The loitering reduced. We were careful. No lingering touches in doorways. No late-night bedroom visits. Sometimes, in the study, we'd be shoulder to shoulder over a particularly moving letter, and I'd feel that familiar pull. His hand would brush mine as we reached for the same page, and we'd both recoil as if burned, then laugh awkwardly. "This is ridiculous," I said once. Painfully, he agreed, but worth it. I'd rather endure 6 weeks of this than give Richard the satisfaction. "Look at us," I said. "Delayed gratification at our age. Who'd have thought? If 21-year-old me could see this, he'd die of confusion." David said, "Good," I replied. "He deserves it." Around week 5, the tide turned. James called one afternoon while we were all in the kitchen. Me, chopping onions. Mrs. Morrison making soup. Eleanor pretending not to eavesdrop. I put him on speaker. "Good news," he said. "Your husband's solicitor has indicated a willingness to settle. Fairly generously, I might add. Once we mentioned we'd be calling Holly as a witness if necessary, and possibly his mother." He suddenly discovered his sense of proportion. I felt the knife still in my hand. "What does settle mean?" I asked carefully. "It means," James said, "that provided you agree, you keep your share of the house, a reasonable slice of his pension, and a lump sum that will more than see you through retraining, moving, and a year or 2 of not having to tolerate anyone's nonsense. And he doesn't get to paint you as a scarlet woman in open court." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Eleanor actually clapped. "When will it be official?" I asked. "Couple of weeks for the paperwork," he said. "You'll get your final order by post. Frame it if you like. I always think they're underappreciated art." He wasn't wrong. The envelope arrived on a dull Tuesday morning, unremarkable brown, with my name printed neatly. I stood in the hall holding it like a bomb. "Do you want company?" David asked. "Yes," I said. We went into the little sitting room, the scene of that first meeting with James, and I slid it open with the side of my thumb. Legal language, dates, orders. The words "the marriage is dissolved" jumping off the page like they'd been written in red. "That's it," I said faintly. "After 28 years, that's it. That's it." David said, "You're free." Free. It was a big word to wear all at once. We didn't pop champagne in a blaze of jubilation. It was quieter than that. Mrs. Morrison brought tea. Eleanor insisted on just a little sherry in hers. I cried a bit in the kitchen later, leaning against the cool of the fridge. Not because I wanted him back, but because the weight of the past had suddenly shifted and my muscles didn't quite know what to do without it. If you've been through divorce yourself, you'll know that strange grief, not for the person, but for the years. Feel free to share if you're comfortable. You're in good company here. That night, I went back to my laptop tabs, archaeology MAs, application forms, personal statements. I filled in my name, my age, my work history. When it came to "why do you want to do this now?" I wrote, "is greater than, because I have spent my life caring for other people's stories. I would like, before it's over, to fully claim my own." Then, before I could overthink it, I hit submit. A week later, on a clear, cold day when the last of the snow had melted into hard, glittering frost, David asked me to meet him in the study after lunch. I walked in to find the room different. The chaos was gone. Of course, we'd tamed that. But now there were new shelves, properly installed, boxes neatly labeled in my handwriting. On the desk, 2 chairs side by side, not opposite. A second mug waiting next to his. "What's this?" I asked. He was standing by the window, backlit, hands in his pockets, in that way he had when he was trying to look casual and failing. "I wanted you to see the study properly," he said, "as it is now, as you've made it." I turned slowly, taking it in. The room felt ours, not Harold's shrine. not a dumping ground, but a working space shaped by both our hands. It's beautiful, I said. It's functional, he corrected, but his mouth was soft. Beautiful is you. I rolled my eyes, but my heart did a little foolish leap anyway. He came round to the front of the desk, leaning back against it. You got an email this morning, he said. You left your laptop open. I frowned. Did you read my subject line only? He said quickly. From the university. I thought it might be important. You've been compulsively refreshing for days. He wasn't wrong. I'd resisted checking it at breakfast. Too jittery. Telling myself I'd wait until I'd finished labeling the Morrison letters. Now, with his eyes on me, there was nowhere to hide. Do you want to? He gestured vaguely, miming typing. I pulled my phone from my pocket instead. Easier to hold, there it was. Is greater than asterisk application outcome. Ma in archaeology, asterisk. My thumb hovered. Open it, he said gently. I did. They'd offered me a place, part-time, starting in the autumn. There were words about my impressive professional experience and clear commitment to the discipline. There was also, at the bottom, a note about a small bursary I might be eligible for, given my age and circumstances. Well, he asked, watching my face. I got in, I said. It came out small and stunned. They want me. Of course they bloody do, he said. You're you. I laughed, a little choked. There's just one thing, I added. They're local. Closest campus is half an hour from here. I'll need somewhere to live. He took a breath, steadied himself, like a man about to jump into cold water. Funny you should say that, he replied, because I've been thinking about accommodation. He reached into his pocket. For a split second, my stomach flipped in pure teenage panic. Before you panic, he said quickly, apparently reading my face, this is not me trying to erase everything we've just fought for by turning you into a kept woman. This is me asking you to choose me as an equal, with your eyes wide open. Then he took out a ring. It wasn't flashy. A single sapphire with little diamonds either side, set in a simple band. Deep blue, like the guest room that had caught me when I fell out of my old life. I chose this, he said quietly, because it's new, not an heirloom, not Dad's, not something anyone else laid claim to. Just us. And because it's the color I think of when I think of you here, the blue room, the blue boxes, the way you look in that old green nightgown Mum gave you. David, I said, mostly to stop myself dissolving. He went on. I can't undo being a coward at 21, he said. I can't give you back the years you spent with a man who didn't see you. What I can do is this. I can offer you my house, our house, as a home, not a trap. I can offer you this study as our workspace, not just my father's. I can stand beside you while you go to lectures and scare teenagers with your competence. He held the ring out, not down on one knee. His knees aren't up to it, and neither are mine, but standing, level with me. Margaret Collins turned Thompson. He said, will you marry me? Not because you need somewhere to go, not because I can pay your legal bills, but because you want me, flaws and all. If you're waiting for a dramatic pause where I agonize, I'm going to disappoint you. I'd done my agonizing, quietly, in the blue room, in Harold's study, over chips in Murphy's diner. Yes, I said. Obviously, yes. His shoulders dropped in visible relief. We both laughed. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit. Of course it fit. Eleanor had clearly been measuring me with her eyes for weeks. And then, finally, we kissed. There was a polite little cough from the doorway. About time. Eleanor said, leaning on her stick. I was starting to think I'd have to do it myself. She stumped in, eyes bright, and looked around the study as if giving it her blessing too. Mrs. Morrison, she called down the corridor. Get out the good china. The real good china. We're celebrating. Later that evening, we sat round the dining table with a frankly unnecessary amount of crockery and silverware. Toasting with very decent champagne, Eleanor told the story of her own second chance with Harold, misremembering a few dates and names but hitting the important beats. This house, she said, tapping the table with one finger, was not built for snobs. It was built to keep people warm and to keep stories safe. Harold forgot that for a while, with his silly ideas about class. I'm glad at least one of us lived long enough to put that right. The snow started again sometime after dessert. Big, slow flakes drifting past the tall windows, catching the light from the tree in the corner. Another tree, another winter. But I didn't feel desecrated this time. I felt chosen. By myself, as much as by David. Much later, when the house was quiet, I stood alone in the hall and looked at my phone. No new messages from Richard. There would still be admin to deal with dividing up the last bits of furniture. Changing my name on records. Emails from mutual friends wanting both sides, but the fight was, in the main, done. I touched the ring, feeling its unfamiliar weight. I thought of James and Catherine Morrison, whose letters we'd carefully boxed and labeled. Lovers separated by war and time, who somehow found their way back to each other after 23 years. We're not them, I whispered to the empty hall, but we're close enough. Then I imagined you, whoever you are, listening to all this. The tree, the diner, the mansion, the court, and I wondered what you'd take from it. Would you leave sooner? If you saw your own Christmas tree lies, would you answer your ex's call? Or let it ring out? If any of this feels like your life trying to tap you on the shoulder, maybe this is your sign to listen. And if you want to hear how the archaeology and the wedding and the rest of it goes, well, stay with me. I've got plenty more stories now I've finally claimed my own.